Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say, Senator Rubio, I want to start off by noting for the record that when I first got to the Senate and I was in my first year and you just run for president and I didn't think you would know who I was pregnant with my daughter and trying to change Senate rules so that I could bring her onto the floor so I could do my job and vote, because I can't come through the normal back door to vote because there's stairs there and it's not accessible for wheelchairs. And I remember in the middle of that battle, rolling through the Senate floor to vote, and I heard, "Tammy Duckworth," from across the Senate chambers, and you came running down from the top back of the Senate chambers to tell me, "I'm with you, I will support you, you have the right to vote, and I will support you being able to bring your daughter, your child onto the floor when she's born." And I want to thank you for that kindness, because you did speak to your leadership about it. And it was a moment of true bipartisanship, but also as parents. And as someone who was new to the Senate, I was extremely grateful to you for that kindness.
I think what I exactly said is, what's the big deal? This place is already full of babies.
Exactly. So I want to touch on a topic we discussed last month. Thank you for sitting down with me. I always appreciate the opportunity to sit down with nominees. I appreciate also your earlier response to Senator McCormick about Americans detained abroad and your commitment to tackling this head on. As you and I also discussed last month, I appreciate your attention and commitment to addressing the case of Illinoisans in particular that we discussed as well. Thank you for that. Another topic, you already touched on some of the issues in the Indo-Pacific, particularly around the PRC and the DPRK, but I'd like to dive back into the issue of ASEAN and the ASEAN nations. Since coming to the Senate, I make a point of visiting Southeast Asia annually to reinforce our friends and partners there, and those that we want to become our friends and partners there, that the United States, and particularly those of us in the Senate, care deeply about these longstanding historic relationships and making sure that those relationships live up to their potential. And as you know, respect for ASEAN centrality has been a core part of our foreign policy in that region. In fact, the first Trump administration's Indo-Pacific strategy correctly emphasized ASEAN centrality as an important principle. Unfortunately, not all of President Trump's nominees this time seems to grasp the importance or in fact know what ASEAN is. Yesterday, I was distinctly unimpressed when questioning Secretary of Defense nominee Hegseth that he could not mention a single nation in ASEAN, particularly shameful when we have at least two major non-NATO allies in the bloc, one of which, Thailand, is the longest treaty alliance that the United States has, at over 190 years long. What can you share with us today about how you would approach ASEAN as a whole and with individual member states to capitalize on some of the key opportunities and challenges facing the region? I know you've spoken about the Philippines, but can you build on that?
Sure. ASEAN, the first thing is, the group's utility begins by the fact that through its 10 members, they've also, I believe, have 5 or maybe it's 6 free trade agreements now with neighboring countries as well. Look, though we have to be very pragmatic in our approach and how we prioritize it. I think the group will always struggle to coordinate unanimity on the issue of their relationship with China. Okay, if you look at the continental, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia, because of their geographic presence, because of history, they lean a little bit more in the Chinese direction, and other countries do not. I think it would be a mistake for us to sort of make it as a condition of our engagement with ASEAN to say, you must pick a side and you must pick a side now. Are you with them or are you with us? I think what I can safely say is that the overwhelming and vast majority of the nation states in ASEAN, if not maybe all, do not want to live in a region in which China is the predominant power and they are viewed as tributary states to Beijing, and welcome U.S. engagement in the region as both an economic and defense counterweight. And so I think we need to view this as, it would be a mistake to go in with sort of a Cold War mentality of pick a side and pick a side now. I think the broader approach is to say they have a vested interest in us being involved. We have a vested interest as an Indo-Pacific nation in involving ourselves through this forum and finding opportunities, both holistically through the 10 nations and individually through whatever bilateral opportunities present itself. Earlier, you may not have been here, but I was asked a question about Thailand, and there is a group of Uyghurs that are in Thailand that they're saying may be deported. And I said, this is one of our strongest, longest relationships in the region, and maybe one of the longest and strongest in the world. And that's where these relationships really come to bear, not to browbeat them in a public forum, but through strong diplomacy and using the benefit of that relationship to go to Thailand and see if we can't get them to not deport these people into the hands of Chinese authorities, knowing the atrocities that have been committed. So that's a value added to this relationship. That is a bilateral relationship we have with Thailand. It's not the one we're going to have with every country in the region, but I do think the forum serves as a useful platform for us to be able to engage the region and individually these countries.
So you would agree with what the first Trump administration emphasized, which is that ASEAN centrality. And I think this is something that the new ASEAN chair, Malaysia, under Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, is saying with the Mandani concept, which is growing that cohesion within ASEAN itself and in dealing with the organization while we continue to pursue those bilateral relationships. But the stronger ASEAN can be cohesively as a unit, allows them to better deal with countries like Myanmar, for example, and allows us to better have those relations with them, and also for them cohesively to try to stand up to outside forces.
One of the things that I think, and I think you saw this in the first Trump term, and we'll probably see again, is to the extent you see production sort of moving from China to other countries, some of these countries stand to benefit from that, assuming they themselves are not the target of some tariff or what have you. But I think there are benefits there in that regard. I would imagine that there are also some concerns they would share with us about maybe some of our other policies, economic or otherwise. But I do think it's an opportunity that provides some real economic development benefit opportunities for a number of the countries in ASEAN. We would hope all of them, but certainly some more than others because of alignment of interests. What I do think is we have to be realistic, and I just want to reiterate this because I think sometimes we go into these things viewing them with the lens of NATO or something else. The key component to understand is we are probably never going to have sort of a overwhelming majority consensus on the role China is going to play. But I do think you could argue that the vast majority of countries in this forum, if not all, do not want to live in a region in which China is the predominant, overwhelming power, and they all are viewed as sort of tributary states. They are not interested in that, and they view the United States as a very logical and welcome economic and defense counterweight to that.
Yeah. And I do think that even the mainland ASEAN nations that, as you, in your words, are lean more towards China, have suffered. If you look at what happens with water, we talked a lot about Mexico and water into Texas, but also with the Mekong River in ASEAN, with the 10 dams that China has built upriver is now affecting water and also arable lands further down the river. And initiatives like the Two Rivers Initiative, which marries the Mississippi River, which is 2/3 of the border of my home state, along with the Mekong River, is a way for us to build some of these relationships and bring in American expertise. A different place where we can also provide expertise is international disability rights. We have been working with ASEAN on developing disability rights and a cohesive approach to it in ASEAN. But I think on an international scale, whether it's ASEAN or Ukraine as they rebuild, I do think that disability awareness, rebuilding Ukraine to become more accessible, promoting disability rights around the world is something that is a way that we can engage with the rest of the world as well. Love to hear from you.
Yeah, and I
your
say this
commitment to disability rights around the world.
And I say this, sadly, it's going to be of critical importance to nations that are emerging from conflict, where we know modern conflict, people are injured in ways that are now survivable, but leave them for the rest of their lives with permanent disability. And so I think it's going to be, in the case, from a very practical perspective, in the case of Ukraine, it's going to be valuable because there are people that have been injured in that conflict that for the rest of their lives are going to have to deal with that, and it's conducive. The other thing we've discussed is our diplomatic facilities around the world and whether they are, and understand that the number one job, the reason why we have embassies and consulates, yes, we represent U.S. interests in that country, but its number one obligation is to support Americans. If you lose your passport, if God forbid you go to jail, whatever it may be, that we have a presence there that can support Americans abroad. And it was stunning for me in our conversation to learn that there are a number of these locations around the world that are not accessible to Americans with disabilities that needed to access them. So it's something that we would have to we'd be interested in looking at as well to make sure that just from our core obligation, we're able to fulfill it.
And also, it keeps many of your own staff members who may have disabilities from serving in some of these overseas missions. As you said, highly trained, well-qualified regional experts, subject matter experts may not be able to serve in some of these embassies where they can't, it's not accessible for them. So I thank you for bringing that up. And I will yield back my 9 seconds, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So generous.